Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to take another look at HTML. This video is part of a larger series of videos that focuses on the introduction to HTML and CSS. In particular, we're going to take another look at HTML tables. In an earlier video, I showed you how to create some very basic tables using the table tag, the tr tag, and then a combination of the th and td tags. The tr tag is for the row, the th tag is for the header cell, and the td tag is for the data cell. Now, in this video, we are going to create a slightly more sophisticated table that is going to have different elements in it, including the head tag. The head tag will allow for us to get a little more sophistication, a little more refinement, and a little more of a description of what is in our table. Now, keep in mind a couple of things. Pardon me. Number one is that a table is meant to be a structure, not a style. So we're going to downplay the style a little bit. But secondly, the idea is that without having some sort of information about what is in the table, as you saw in our first example, when we started off with the first name, middle initial, and last name, that you don't really know what is in the table, and you don't really know much about the structure without these additional tags. So the head tag, or rather the thead tag, serves as a way of defining what's going to be in the table, not only for a style or a default style standpoint, but also for whatever other applications might consume your HTML. Think of it as a program that reads a website and parses the HTML. Likewise, we can also use an HTML body tag, which will allow for you to encapsulate the entire body or the data in the table. And then also a tfoot tag, which will allow you to have a footer for the table. Now, we're going to use this in a slightly different way than what they have done here in the W3 schools, again, for a little bit of variety. But let's go ahead and get started by opening all of these tabs that I have open: the table, the thead, the tbody, and the tfoot. And what we're going to do is a similar example to what we did in the last video, where we are going to leverage those links to create sort of a nice little how-to for us moving forward. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and add an H1 tag and simply specify that this page is going to cover more tables. And then what we'll do is we will add a table, but unlike before where we're going to just jump straight into it using a tr element, I'm going to go ahead and include a thead element, a tbody element, and then ultimately a tfoot element. And I'm doing it this way because that way I can sort of automate the structure of, or the creation of the structure of this table. In other words, as you know, humans are error prone. As a matter of fact, I'll intentionally try to make a mistake here so you could see what would happen if we did forget one of the elements or forget one of our cells. And so the idea is I sort of like to do this in a systematic way where I set up all of my tags and then sort of fill in the gaps. And what we saw last time was that without any styling, if I were to save this right now, I can simply pull this up. It's going to be really hard to see what's actually there. In other words, there's my H1 tag, and that's about all I see. And so what we're going to do is we're going to come in and at least do some default styling for the table. And again, you can play around with this however much you want. We're going to go ahead and just use the border. And again, you could set it to whichever one you'd like to. Let's set this to dashed for a little bit of variety. By the way, before I forget, I'd like to go ahead and show you that you can also go ahead and do things like change. For instance, I tell you what, we're going to get to that in one of the rows. I was going to show you how to change the color, but we'll get to that in just a second. You can do the same thing then with the individual head, body, and foot. But let's go ahead and see what changes we've made here by refreshing this. And again, you can see at least some indication that there is going to be a table there. Let's go ahead and start populating our thead, this time with a tr tag. followed by a TH tag. And again, I'm going to go ahead and put my style in here. I'm going to go ahead and make a border. And again, for a little bit of variety here, we will do dashed. And now what I can do is I can simply specify the color. And again, I'm just going to have a little bit of fun with this, probably create the world's ugliest table. We're going to go ahead and start off with aqua. And since I kind of know that I want to have 3 columns here, I'm going to start off with 3 header cells. And that first header cell is going to be the tag. That second header cell is going to be the description. And that third header cell then will be the link, much like in our earlier example. Now I'm going to go ahead and save this to see exactly how terrible of a table we've created. Ooh, that one is pretty bad. I think we need to make some changes here. That's probably not going to show up great in the video. Let's come up with something a little bit better. I tell you what, in addition to the color, why don't we change the background color? That'll probably make it a little easier on our eyes here. So I'm going to change the color to the background color. And again, we're not going to focus too much on the style here. If anything, I'm just having a little bit of fun with this one. And again, you can play around with whatever colors you'd like. I'm going to go ahead and put the semicolon here on the end. We'll talk a little bit more about style in a later video. Let's see if I've made at least a little bit of improvement here. There we go. It's still pretty terrible looking, arguably intentionally terrible looking, but the idea here is that you can play around with now the background color. The downside with the color is it'll change both the background color and the font color. You can go through and modify the font color and so on. Again, we're going to cover style in later series. Now, let's go back to the individual cells in the body. And again, what we're going to do is we're going to start this process off with a TR tag. We're going to go ahead and include a TD tag. And we're going to go ahead and jump in there with our style. And again, have our border. We'll keep it with dashed for this video. And again, for the background color, let's see if we can come up with something, hopefully that's not quite as bad. How about if we let's do maybe something a little softer here, the aquamarine. We'll see how this turns out. And then I'm going to go ahead and fill out the TD tag, and I'm going to just go ahead and copy and paste this 3 times just to see what this looks like. Go ahead and save it, and we'll come over here and we will simply go ahead and refresh this. And again, you can see just that thin line right there. That is the beginnings of our cells associated with that first row. And again, I know that this probably looks terrible. It's partially intentional because I want you to see the gaps between the borders, between the cells in the table and so on, all things we can control later on when we start looking at style. Remember, the focus here is on structure. So let's come back over here. And what we can do is we can simply just go ahead and make a copy of this TR. And we know that we have 4 elements that we ultimately want to document. We're going to document the table tag, the thead tag, the tbody tag, and the tfoot tag. Again, you can go ahead and do other documentation as well for other elements, but we'll just make 3 more copies of this. So that's 2, 3, and then 4. Now, I would like to point out at this point how we can sort of make a mistake if we were doing this manually. In other words, I'm going to come along and I'm going to accidentally forget one of my elements here. In other words, we're going to pretend that I've made a mistake here and I've only got 2 cells in that 3rd row. I'm going to go ahead and save it. And I'm going to come over here and I'm going to refresh this. And you're going to see that it will in fact work. It's still technically valid HTML code, although it doesn't necessarily have the desired results. So again, you can sort of see why I am doing it in this sort of systematic way of copying and pasting an empty cell just to get started so that I don't make mistakes as I go along. And again, as I mentioned in the earlier video, this is probably not a great way of styling your document because these inline styles have to be changed manually. And we'll look later on, we'll see how we can style the entire document at the top of the document or in a separate style sheet based on the element type and some other selectors. But for now, let's go through and let's improve on our table, beginning with adding our tags that we're interested in, our table tag, our tbody tag, our thead tag, got ahead of myself there, our tbody tag, and our tfoot tag. And now it's just a matter of going back over to the W3 Schools site, leveraging their descriptions. And this time around, we're not going to shy away from those angle brackets. So I'm going to show you how we can convert those descriptions. Actually, let's change this. I made a little mistake here. I didn't follow my own instructions. This should be the tag. And then we go into the description. This is going to be the thead, tbody, and then the tfoot. And before we make the correction, let's first see what the problem is here, in that we have started now a new tag within our TD before closing the TD, or we've opened a new tag without closing it. Specifically, we've opened a new table inside of a table and we haven't correctly closed it. So basically what you're going to discover is that you're going to have a parsing problem. If you notice here, my warning is text is not allowed between the opening and closing tags for the element table. Again, don't worry too much about the details of this. What we want to do is look at the effect by simply attempting to display this, and you can see that this is now a complete mess. And so what we want to do is we want to figure out how can we actually correctly display those angle brackets when they effectively denote an element, an HTML element. Well, it turns out what we can do is we can just substitute in this case, our less than symbol with a pattern of characters, ampersand, LT, and a semicolon, and that indicates in HTML that you want to display the less than symbol. You can do the same thing now with a greater than symbol, with doing ampersand, GT, and then a semicolon, and that will allow for us then to display a greater than, which effectively means that we now have the brackets around our T head, T body, T foot, and the table itself. So I'm going to just carefully go in and replace the ones that I want to actually display with the ampersand LT and GT followed by the semicolon. So again, we can see here some minor improvements in this example. Let's go ahead and save this. Let's see how we're doing by coming over to our web browser one more time. We're going to refresh this and you'll see now this starts to look a little bit more like the HTML documentation you see on the W3 Schools, minus, of course, those crazy colors. Now, we want to go ahead and use the description again, just like we did before, and that just give a brief description. I believe last time we called this the HTML root table root element. This T head is the HTML table header block. The T body is the HTML table body. And again, to emphasize this, this is where the data is. This is where your metadata is going to be, theoretically, assuming that you've set it up this way. And in the foot, this is going to be the HTML table footer. And the best way to think of this is going to be for a summary. Again, there's a couple of different ways that you can go about doing this. Now, let's go back and let's utilize the hyperlinks that we saw in the tables themselves or in the links themselves. The idea here is that I want to leverage the hyperlinks starting with the table. And again, you'll notice that the URL simply changes ever so slightly. There's the table, there's the head, the body, and the foot. And again, we can get as fancy as we want to with the links. This is, as it turns out, a little bit different than we did the last time. I'm going to have my href. I'm going to leave it as a set of empty quotes for right now. I'm going to close it, and I'm simply going to make a couple of copies of it to start with. Again, just to be systematic. And then we can come back in and we can just simply drop then the correct links in there. Again, whatever you want to use for the text is completely up to you. We can even go so far for a little bit of variety here. How about if we emphasize that it is, in fact, the W3 schools? The difference here is instead of table, it is going to be the thead. And again, we'll do the W3 schools. tbody. W3 schools once again. And then lastly, for our footer. Now, we're going to make a quick change on this one in just a second. But let's go ahead and display what we have so far. We can come back over here, and if I don't have any typos, we should have a nice looking table now. And all of our links just simply say W3 schools on it, tells you who you're going to. Again, a little bit of variety from our last example. We just want to spot check a couple of these links to make sure that they work correctly. And it seems like we have gotten this mostly working like we intended to, which brings us now to our foot tag, or our tfoot tag. And then what I want to do is I want to figure out what information do I want down in the tfoot. Well, for a little bit of guidance, what I encourage you to do is to look at the W3 schools page on the foot tag. And what we're going to do is we're going to play around with this just so we can see a little variety. You can see here that they have a TR element with two TD elements. As a matter of fact, it matches all of the previous rows in that each of the rows have two cells in them. And in this case, what they're doing is they're building a little bit of a budget. So this tfoot serves as somewhat of a summary to be able to sum up all of the expenses, in this case for January and February, but the idea is that you would continue it for the rest of the months. So in other words, this one kind of has a purpose behind it in having the same number of columns in the footer. Well, if you come back to our example real quick, it probably doesn't make a ton of sense for us to have 3 columns in our footer. You could almost argue that it probably doesn't even make sense for this particular table to even have a footer. But again, to demonstrate then how you would go about doing this, you could simply then just include a TR tag followed up with a TD tag. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little note here that says more coming soon. And the idea is that this would be a placeholder to indicate that this is going to expand as you start adding more links. And I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'm going to come back over to our page. I'm going to go ahead and refresh this, and you'll recall that I didn't actually style this particular one. So we've got a couple of things that we need to go back and figure out here. But you'll notice now that I have information now in the footer. Let's go back and let's add a little bit more to this footer. Particularly, let's add some style for the border, just like we did with our earlier ones. And again, we can just continue with the dashed theme. And let's go ahead and add something for the background color. And again, let's see what kind of crazy color that we can come up with. Maybe brown. That should probably look pretty terrible here. Again, I'm having a little bit of fun with this as I'm going through this. And you can see here that the footer does not, in fact, span all 3 of the columns. Now, I'm going to leave this one the way it is. I'm actually going to show you in a later series of videos when we start talking about styling, how you can actually adjust the size of each of these cells. But for right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this alone so you can see here where the footer is in relation to the head, the body, and for that matter, the entire table. Again, we can have our links, we can have other elements inside of our tables. In a later video, I'm actually going to show you how you can put tables inside of tables, images inside of tables. And at this point, you can pretty much guess that there are a lot of different elements that you can put inside of a table cell. As always, I hope you found this video useful. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And thank you for watching.